Hey, this is Althea with Wove Inspiration Podcast. Yes, it has been over a year since I have been doing podcasting, but I am super excited to have my special guest on the show today. Her name is Angeline Constantinou, and she is a domestic abuse survivor, not someone who is still in it, but she has overcome a lot of great obstacles in her life. She is also an entrepreneur and a women's empowerment coach. And we're going to be talking about what it looks like to heal from that type of situation in their life and anything else that she may have experienced. But the overall goal is to let you know that there is the ability to overcome and go forward. So, Angeline, thank you so much for being on Wove Inspiration.
And Althea, it is a honor and pleasure to be on your podcast show today. And thank
Thank
you
you.
for
Thank
having me
you.
on your podcast show.
Absolutely. So, Angeline, let's go ahead and get into it because domestic abuse is, of course, still going on and everything. And there are women today that may be listening to this podcast and they're like, how am I going to overcome this? And what is the next thing that I need to do? But before we get into that part, tell me a little bit about what your relationship like was initially, and
Mhm.
then let's go forward from there.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, Althea. So thank you again for having me on your show. So once upon a time, I used to be married to whom I thought was going to be the love of my life. And we met in New York City. And this is when I had just moved from Minnesota to New York in 1985. So I had joined an organization that was part of the church that actually we both used to go to in Long Island. He was a high powered businessman. He was also 19 years older than me. And I was in my 20s. And I was, looking for a partner at that time and, looking to level up my life. So, when we first met, things were hunky dory. He painted the picture, um, that I was in great hands, that I had security, that he would be a good provider. I ended up working in his advertising and direct mail business. So when we met 6 months later, we eloped. So we bought a house in Dutchess County, New York, in the town of Rhinebeck, New York. And we bought a 2-story cape because we wanted to get out of New York City because we were making 6-figure income. But then when the World Trade Center collapsed, that's when we decided to move. Business fell that time 80%. And we bought the house, I think it was in 1987, 1988. So we were commuting back and forth every other week. I was working in this business in outside sales. He had a direct mail advertising business, and I brought in the income. So I was bringing in sales because we catered to restaurants. And then when we moved to upstate New York, then we expanded industries and everything. So everything was going well until 9/11.
Okay.
So when nine
Okay.
eleven happened, business fell, and he started to display, even before then, a side of himself that I didn't see before because he wore the mask.
Okay.
He wore the mask. So he became verbally abusive. He
Hmm.
was blaming me for everything. And the next thing you know, in December of 1999, an argument ensued. I was lying down in the bed, and I was crying, and he was just admonishing me. And I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. So I
Yeah.
said, you know what? I'm just going to walk away and go into the other room and just sleep and try and get some sleep. And I did not make it into the other room. He took me behind the neck and he threw me against the wall, and I fell backwards
Wow.
and my nose was shattered.
My God.
and I was bleeding and I was lying down, and I remember looking up at the ceiling and just praying to God that, God would save me that night, because of that, I could have died that night.
Yeah.
Could have died that night. And he took me and he cleaned me up and he drove me to the emergency room.
Oh, how nice of him. Like, really?
Yeah, I guess he carried me down the stairs, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here?
Right.
Yeah, what's going on here? He takes me to, and he's in the emergency room with me all night. I am hooked up on IV. I was hooked up on
Wow.
IV all night, and the the nose and the surgeon who I knew came up to me and he said, "You're going to need reconstructive nose surgery." So
Wow.
3 days. So I was released at 5 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't even sleep. I was in so much pain, all bandaged up, black and
Hmm.
blue all over. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was ashamed to tell the police this, because unfortunately, like, officers, they don't do anything about it. And women, this is one of the reasons why women feel stuck, because they feel that they don't have a voice. So 3 days
Hmm.
later, I went in for surgery. The surgery was successful, and they kept me overnight, because when they gave me Demerol, they OD'd on Demerol. So I was not feeling well. Yeah, but I still, like, I went to St. Benedictine Hospital in Kingston, New York, and before the patient is taken into surgery, they do a prayer. So one of the sisters came in
Hmm.
and prayed for me, and we prayed, and I'm very grateful for her, because I did make it through. Sorry for the coughing. So I did make it through the surgery, and he stayed with me, not all night, but he stayed until the doctor said, to keep her overnight. So I stayed overnight, and the next day he took me home, but I was out of commission for 3 weeks. I couldn't go
Wow.
out. I wasn't able to drive. And, I had to keep the bandage on for 1 week. But once the bandage came off, then I started to seek employment, because he was planning to retire from his business.
Okay.
And I didn't want to stay home with him. I said, I'm just going to go out and look for work.
Yeah.
So I did find employment. I was working for an ad agency out of Maryland, and they treated me very well. But he tried to sabotage it. The jealousy
Wow.
came. See, he became more jealous and resentful. So even though, he was able to retire
Sure.
and I was out there working, that didn't sit well with him,
Yeah.
because what I was doing was I was working on reclaiming my identity.
That part. Yes.
That part.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And that's very hard for someone to do, but I sought mentorship, and that's when I got involved in the online space. I'm sorry, that changed my life. So I was exploring opportunities. So in 2008, the stock market crashed, and we lost a lot of money. Probably, I would say, $200,000
Oh, wow.
gone. And that put us in a hole. And he, because he mismanaged finances, he just mismanaged it. And he put all his eggs in one basket, which is not a good idea when you're investing. You want to diversify, and he didn't do that. So, what I found out later was he wrote out balance transfer checks against our credit, because we were co-owners, like credit cards. So
Hmm.
he wrote balance transfer checks so he could buy more mutual funds.
Oh my.
So when I
Okay.
saw that was happening, I'm like, I need to put I said, this is, plus the verbal abuse.
Hmm.
That was the only time that he hit me, was in 1999. But then when the verbal abuse, it just became so rampant that he was accusing me of mismanaging finances, when in fact he was doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
I would write out checks and checks would start bouncing. I'm like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? So he was hiding it.
Yeah. So there's the gaslighting. There's the oh, wait a minute. You're the one that's writing these checks, and that's why they're bouncing as opposed to him being the one that's been doing all this stuff behind the scenes anyway.
Right.
So
He was
there's
doing
that.
this behind the scenes, and then he took away my privilege to manage the account. So what I ended up doing was and I lost my job. And so I started a separate account.
Yeah.
And I was collecting unemployment. So all the unemployment went into the separate account. He didn't, he had no access to that. So
Yeah.
I was able to, save some money. So always have a plan in place.
Yeah,
When you see that,
definitely.
especially, there's a lot of single moms out there with children,
Hmm.
and a lot of them feel helpless, but they rely on the partner or the spouse to take
Right.
care of the finances. And that's something that I would not recommend. I recommend that you have your own nest egg, start your own nest egg. I mean,
Yeah.
I entrusted him on on the finances, and it ended up backfiring. So, but I put a plan in place, and I filed for divorce in May of 2010 because I finally reached my breaking point. And when you reach your breaking point, nothing matters. It just,
Yeah.
yeah, I said I need to get out of my marriage and I need to just own up to the fact. So I surrendered. I surrendered
That,
my
yeah.
pride and ego, and I didn't care what, family members thought. In fact, I had support from some family members who supported me on this journey. So my first cousin was very influential, and she was very, very supportive. And I went through the divorce process, which is not easy because everything comes out in court. And he tried to make me the bad person, but the judge caught on. So we worked out a settlement, but that didn't happen until a year later. But we did work out a settlement, and I was able to leave New York City and Rhinebeck and have a fresh start in Saratoga Springs 15 years ago. So,
Nice,
yeah.
nice. I'm going to go back just a wee bit because part of the journey would start when you start seeing signs of that individual, what little things that like kind of make them upset. And it might not be anything major, but it goes to another level. So when you were saying that you saw signs prior to the actual abuse, that the physical abuse that came upon
Mm.
you, what were some of the things that you saw that was like, okay, why would he do that? What were some of the things you saw?
I saw gaslighting, and I saw, like he would, not in the beginning, but towards the end, he would talk behind my back.
Okay.
He would talk behind my back, and I didn't know about it. And the only way I found out is when my cousin called me. This was around April of 2010. My first cousin called me, and she said, "Well, your mom just called and she's very upset right now." I said, "Why is my mom upset?" "Because he called." Or I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "This is not," that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And I said, "I am done. I am done." But before then, like, he was lovey dovey, like in the
Mhm.
beginning, lovey dovey, that's love bombing. So one of the things he did was love bombing, and then a few days later he wouldn't talk to me. He would
Yeah.
gaslight me. And then when we would go out in public, sometimes he would, you know, he was out there to make a good impression, but it was all about him. And it wasn't all about us. It wasn't all
Yeah.
about me. And meanwhile, I had taken care, I worked in the business and took care of the finances until he took that away from me. Because what I found out later didn't sit well with me.
Yeah. How important is it for women to have that support when they're about to make that transition out of that abusive relationship?
It is very important.
Hmm.
Support and finding a community is very, very important. So I found the online space in 2010. I was looking for a community, and I'm sorry, I also became involved in network marketing. So network marketing was new to me. And then I stumbled upon an ad that I saw, and I started to make friends with leaders and started to surround myself with leaders who were on a higher level than me because I was transitioning. I mean, this was like, this was sink or swim at this point
Right.
because I was providing for myself. So I found a company that changed my life, a health and wellness company called Beachbody, which is now Bodhi. I'm not with them anymore, but at the time they changed my life. I started to get involved in activities, and I started to build my business. I built it behind the scenes, so he did not know about it. And I was proud of myself because I stepped into leadership. I stepped into my true purpose and calling at
Yeah.
that time. So actually, a year later, it was actually a month after my divorce, I flew to Los Angeles, California to attend my first conference, and that was life changing. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, a month later, I could just like go, because we had settled and I had moved to upstate New York or to Saratoga Springs. So I lived in New York and I lived there for 15 years. And so I went to the conventions and I, was out there networking, out there building and, building my identity because part of rediscovery is finding yourself, finding
Yes.
what your true passion is and finding what your true calling is. So I was with Beachbody for 6 years and then I left and I went out to work in corporate America again for several companies. So you always learn, always learning and growing and evolving. And
Yeah.
I decided 2 months before COVID to leave my full time job because I was working for an ad agency and I just took
Okay.
the leap of faith and I said, I'm just going to start my podcast. And
Nice.
this happened 2 months before COVID hit. So let's break the silence with Angeline to break the silence, to give women a platform to find their voice, to use their voice. There's power in their voice
Yes, it is.
and
Yes,
to
it
share their
is.
real life stories of
Mhm.
how they came out of domestic violence. And a lot of them, a lot of women with whom I've interviewed are now speakers and authors, they're coaches. For myself, I'm a women's empowerment life coach. And, I love to speak. And I spoke at a mastermind event last year
Nice.
in December. And I became a co author of a book series
Nice.
called the Change Book Series because, and spearheaded by Les Brown. Les Brown is on the front cover because, the people they saw potential.
Yeah.
They wanted me to share your story. So people are watching us on social media,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
able to build a following on Facebook. I have over 14,000 followers, and now I am, I'm still on Facebook, but now I am building my following on TikTok now. And
Yeah.
yes, so, and just getting my name out there. And so I worked hard. I worked very hard to build my brand for 3 years.
Mhm. And the major piece was that you were able to find your identity, discover your identity, and it was a little there were different processes that you had to go to, and it was the connecting with other individuals that
Mm.
would be able to take you up that level. Specifically Les Brown, I'm just saying. I seen the picture with you and Les Brown and I'm
Oh,
like,
good.
that's huge. That's like
Yes,
huge, man. That's crazy.
yes.
What was that experience like?
That was amazing. And it was spearheaded by two people. One was Jim Britt, and, he worked closely with Les Brown and Jim Rowan, and also Jim Lutz, who had the pleasure of meeting in San Diego last year and spoke at his live mastermind event to educate women and men about domestic violence and
Yes.
how the healing tools and techniques that I use. So I have a course. I have an evergreen coaching course online, and I talk about ways. It's a 9-week program, and it's designed to help you find clarity, to find clarity and build your confidence, so you can step into your true identity through God.
Awesome.
And and it's a great, I've taken it myself, because we all go through a rediscovery.
Of
So
course.
it's finding your true identity and helping you find your true purpose in
Yeah.
life. And it requires a lot of shadow work, a lot of journaling. So I have workbooks and I have video tutorials. So shadow work is important because without the shadow work, you're, letting go.
Hmm.
There's a lot of inner work to let go of those self-limiting beliefs that are holding you back, because believe it or not, I still had some self-limiting beliefs that I had to let go of. It's letting go of the past, just
Yeah.
pushing fear out the window, just
Hmm.
pushing it out the window and working on yourself. What is your true purpose in life? What did you love doing as a child? you
Right.
know and
Starting
what's
from the beginning for sure.
right, because the biggest thing that cripples women is
Yeah.
fear and doubt, because the devil, I mean, you all are destined for greatness. Women are destined for greatness,
Amen.
and to make a name for themselves, and to empower other women. So the tools and techniques that I learned from my mentor, and I invested a lot of money in these tools, helped me regain my power and true purpose in life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So we had initially started off the conversation as far as the topic of partnering with God in your healing. So what did that process look like for you as you were finding your identity? You're making all of these connections, but
mm,
there were still had to be still some emotional healing that had to take place. And so what did that look like for you as you were healing with the help of God?
well, I realized that, and I did this at the beginning actually, when I was transitioning out of domestic violence. I turn to God for everything. I
Yeah.
walk with the Lord every when I wake up in the morning and put 2 feet on the ground. I thank God every morning for I thank the good Lord every morning for for being alive, and to make an impact and to have a voice, because life is short. We are meant to Life is worth living, taking that leap of faith. So I walk with the Lord in the morning. I had taken a radiant leadership class through an organization last year, and I got my certification in Radiant Leadership Academy, and it was actually a year ago today,
Okay.
because I stepped into my identity. I There's a lot of like shadow work, a lot
Hmm.
of shadow work, and armoring up with God. You have to armor yourself up with
Yeah,
God,
for
because
sure.
if you don't, then the devil's going to take over.
Hmm.
The devil's going to take over, and before you know it, you're going to be down a rabbit hole. So I did a lot of shadow work, letting go. Some of those self-limiting beliefs were like, I'm not worthy. Like, yeah, I'm not worthy. I don't
Yeah,
feel successful. And I've had failures. I've had failures in my life, but I've learned through coaching and mentoring that failures are teachers.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What suggestions do you have for women who they've finally made that step? They're working towards now they found their identity, but they're working towards purpose. What suggestions can you offer some of those women?
Yes. So, first, seek a community of support and make sure that you have an exit plan in place. And make sure, because I had cooperation from the authorities, because they knew that I meant business and I wanted to leave. So, make sure that you have a protective order, and do not rescind the
Yes,
protective order, because if you rescind it, the police are not going to support you. They're not going to
exactly.
cooperate, even though they may sympathize. Because there were times when I thought my ex was going to be arrested, and they didn't arrest him. I had to leave, but make sure
Yeah.
that you have that plan in place, that
Yeah.
exit plan. And there are resources out there for domestic violence survivors. So there was an instance. This happened actually during COVID. Everything shut down in New York City. Okay, sorry about that.
No
Little
worries.
cough. Okay, sorry. So anyway, so this girl reached out to me, and she was in trouble. she had a baby, not a baby, like 2, 3 years old, and her partner was abusing her, verbal abuse, physical abuse. She called me. She had, like, she was hysterical, like
Mhm.
really hysterical. But I put her mind, I said, take a deep breath, do some meditation. Let's meditate, let's pray. And I said, so I went online to search and I said, guess what? There are domestic violence shelters in New York City. So lo and behold, a light bulb moment came for her.
Mhm.
So she contacted she, I don't know if they're open. I said, call anyways. Who said that they're not open? So one of them was open. So she went to a shelter. She took her baby. She escaped, and then they got her like a 1 bedroom residence.
Awesome.
Yeah. So she escaped, but it was that light bulb moment. That
Yeah.
light bulb moment. And another thing that I did was in 2018, in March, my mentor said, now this was one of the other things I wanted to talk about, which I forgot to talk about earlier. So he said, you haven't shared your story with the world. Like, people know that you are a domestic violence survivor, but they don't know your story. It's sharing your story and stepping into your truth. So I did that. So I held the camera. I went live on Facebook in my apartment. Camera shaking. I'm not smiling. I'm a nervous wreck. I cried in the beginning, but then I regained my composure and shared my story. And 7
Yes.
million views later.
Wow.
So my story had an impact on over 7 million people because Facebook decided to push it out. They said, this is a subject that resonates with us. So we're going to push her content out, push this live out. And people from all over the world were sharing my story. There were like over 2,000 shares. When I woke up the next day, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
It's like that. It's that being transparent
Right.
that people are really looking for. Yeah, we can be in front of a camera or standing on stage, looking a certain way, appearing as though, all is together, but in sharing your story and being transparent, it's like, well, I see what she looks like now, but I didn't know that it was like it was back then. Change. There's the ability to overcome, and there is a process.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's a process, but there is the ability to overcome and go from victim to victor, for sure.
Right, exactly.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
I stepped into what my mentor called my naked truth, and like I said, my story resonated with people worldwide because this is a worldwide epidemic,
Yes, it is.
and no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
women are forced to be silenced.
Mm.
Yeah, there's no reason for that.
You are absolutely
There's no
right.
reason for that. Women need to, have the courage to come forward and share their story. And if it's a 10-minute live, that's okay too. My live was only 18 minutes, and that was enough.
That was more than
That
enough,
was
for
more than
sure.
enough. So,
Angeline, how can people get in contact with you, listen to your podcast? Do they have the ability to come on your show and share their
sure.
story as well? How can people reach you?
Yes, okay. So they can reach me at letsbreakthesilence.com. So they can book a call with me, which is on the homepage, and we can schedule a call and talk about and see if you will be a good fit to be on my podcast. And so that's where I send people to letsbreakthesilence.com. And and all my social media platforms are on there. But if they want to contact me through Facebook, my Facebook is Angeline Constantinou. And then if they want to connect with me on Instagram, it is again Angeline underscore Constantinou. And then on TikTok, I am under Angeline underscore break the silence.
Awesome. Awesome.
So I'm
And
on
I
TikTok.
will,
But the best way to contact
yeah.
me, because my podcast is on Spotify.
Okay.
So my podcast is on Spotify, Apple, and on my YouTube channel.
Nice, nice. And I will definitely have all of those links on the show notes at the end of this show. So, Angeline, do you have any last words for our listening audience?
Yes, I do. And that is never give up.
Yes.
Never give up. Always stand in your truth and be a voice for other women out there. I mean, there's not a day that, domestic violence is on the rise again.
Yeah.
And, because our economy, we live in crazy times today. I think more so now than COVID. So I think this is like a post COVID that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But stay your ground, seek resources, have a plan of action in place if you're planning to escape, and make sure that you alert the authorities of what your steps are. I had a caseworker who worked with me for 1 year. So
That's
I'm
good.
not afraid. Okay. That's, I had a caseworker who worked with me step by step, because going to court was no picnic for me, because that's when all the dirty laundry comes out. But in the
Yes.
end, I claimed victory. So claim victory in your life. Take ownership.
Yes.
Claim victory in your life, and you will see that your life will flourish
Amen.
and
Amen.
abundance will flow to you.
That's awesome. Angeline, it has been a blessing to have you on Wove Inspiration Podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us.
My pleasure, Althea. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast show. And I pray that everyone will be listening to this podcast episode. And I hope that this podcast show will inspire you to take those steps to
Amen.
claiming victory.
You guys, this is Althea with Wove Inspiration Podcast. You guys have a blessed day. Take care.